Welcome on in to the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malamud here with you, along with Dak Melvin and Zach. We made it to the Fantasy Football Playoffs, finally.
Yeah, we're finally here, Brett. Finals week is over for me for the fall semester, so I'm excited and ready to watch some football this weekend.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, and congratulations to all those out there who made the fantasy playoffs. It's obviously been a long and grueling season, quite a bit of injuries from previous seasons, I feel like. And so, yeah, you kind of earned this one based off of all of that compared to some other years. Before we get into it, please subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Give us the thumbs up. And make sure you get yourself interactive here in our comments. We're going to answer any questions that you guys have, lineup-wise, dynasty-wise, our dynasty this waiver deadline for the offseason for the non-playoff teams ends at the end of today. And so, Zach, you made some stash moves as far as the offseason goes, as you didn't make the playoffs. And I have a bye week this week, so I'm going to be sitting back and watching some football and not having to worry about stressing over some of my guys, which will be pretty good. But yeah, so any questions that anybody has, throw them in the comments. We're going to get to as many of them as we can. Zach, let's start out with some big news here. First off here, Justin Herbert goes to the IR. He fractures his index finger, and he is ruled out for the entire year by Brandon Staley. Zach, I think that this is going to be one of those things that ends up leading to Brandon Staley being fired as the coach of the Los Angeles Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, Brett, a lot of people would have told you that maybe a year ago and said, yeah, all right, yeah, that makes sense. But, I mean, it didn't happen, and obviously Staley stayed as the Chargers head coach, and now they finish even worse this season. So, not even close to the playoffs they are. It does make sense in the end. Just get the surgery done. He got hurt, of course, in that game on Sunday. And just the focus now goes long-term and to not risk Justin Herbert's health, your franchise quarterback, easily. He's their franchise quarterback. So you're not worried about that. Just getting him healthy and making sure that he's ready to go for the future. I don't think it'll take too long, except, yeah, there's only a couple weeks left in the season, so you might as well not risk it. They're completely, I think, eliminated almost from playoff contention. They're just about there. So not a time to risk it, and just hoping that he gets better soon. And it's not a ton of problems, because this is a really important guy for me, specifically in Dynasty. It stinks that I lost him as well in a redraft league. I know a lot of other people lost actually Herbert in a redraft league and then still made it into the playoffs. I'm one of those people. You just got to figure out a backup plan right now. My situation, I have Jared Goff right behind him, so I'm going to be riding with him this week. But look at some streamers. We'll probably bring up a couple throughout that could be a replacement for Herbert this week.
Yeah, it's just kind of interesting in how you almost craft that dynasty mindset when it comes to an injury like this, and how a coach can actually change an entire dynasty outlook of a team. Obviously, there's a lot of question marks heading into this offseason with the Chargers. Now they obviously add quarterback, and will the quarterback be healthy heading into next year? This is now the second year in a row that Justin Herbert has dealt with some sort of injury. And so, yeah, obviously, like, you deal with the wide receiver situation. We talked about Keenan Allen, we talked about Mike Williams, Josh Palmer, what the future looks like there. Obviously, they drafted one in the first round who didn't really pan out so far. Hasn't really gotten that opportunity yet. And we'll get into Quentin Johnson, I'm sure, a ton over the offseason as we start to do like our disappointments of the year, things like that. Chargers, though, because of their success last year, their strength of schedule was really good this year. So they really don't have any tiebreakers over anybody. Tied from the 5th pick to the 10th pick, they're tied at 5 and 8, and they don't have the tiebreaker over any of those teams. Fall from 5 through 9, and so, yeah, they can jump up obviously based off of wins and losses. But right now they got the 10th pick in the draft. Herbert obviously out for the year. So they go to the pride of Omaha, Nebraska, out of North Dakota State, a 4-time FCS champion. It's Easton Stick. So, congratulations to Easton there. It's a big opportunity for him. 5th round pick. So, Zach, just as far as the outlook here on the Chargers, obviously Eckler came back pretty strong. And so, kind of fought off the Josh Kelly, Isaiah Spiller hype that we saw from Brandon Staley in the press conferences last week. Seems that he's kind of taken that role back over and fought off the haters a bit. But as far as the receiver game goes, is this something where you can rely on a QJ or rely on a Josh Palmer?
Yeah, Brett, because a story we don't have here, but we'll get to it, is Keenan Allen officially being ruled out for Thursday night. So that's a big loss for the Chargers as well in the passing game. There's been a little bit of a sample size from preseason, but it felt like Easton Stick, he played a fair amount of the preseason games, and his relationship with Quentin Johnston was pretty good, Brett. So, rookie to rookie, they have that chemistry, and it seemed to be working out for them in preseason. I think I would be looking for Quentin Johnston to be that number one guy this week, especially with Keenan Allen not playing now. Of course, you could end up saying it could be an Eckler game, but I feel like every game could be an Eckler game, and it hasn't panned out that way. It's just been a little bit wonky for Austin Eckler, whether that was just lingering from that injury that he ended up coming back from. But it has not been a great year for Austin Eckler. You're still going to be trusting him and still rely on him, but I feel like the expectations are just a little bit lower now with Easton Stick at quarterback. It kind of changes things of receiving out of the backfield. Maybe the opposing teams in Las Vegas, they focus on that a little bit more, but I feel like it could end up being the tight ends, whether Everett or Parham, one of them is healthy, or it can end up being Quentin Johnston, who gets a big target share in this one, because I do think they're going to end up being down in Vegas. I don't see this team going in and absolutely trouncing Vegas in Vegas tomorrow night.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because, you take a look at some of the other backup quarterbacks around the league. They've had success. Obviously we start, Zach Wilson just got named AFC Player of the Week. Tommy DeVito got named NFC Player of the Week this week. Jake Browning's had some pretty good success in a situation where he really wasn't expected to be the guy. List goes on and on. And so, yes, the expectations aren't high, but also the opportunities. Listen, these guys are NFL players. And so there's opportunity for him there. And if not, there's a guy who went to TCU sitting right behind him, Mac Duggan. And so there's always the opportunity that he comes in the next couple of weeks as well. One thing that you mentioned, though, about the preseason, I think is pretty important here. If you take a look all the way back to the preseason, who was the number 3, who was the number 4, and was actually practicing with Stick, it was Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer. Because, of course, they had Keenan Allen, they had Mike Williams lined up as the ones, and so they were practicing a lot with Herbert. You saw the other two kind of flip-flop 3rd, 4th roles throughout training camp. And so, yeah, they're familiar with Stick. Stick's familiar with them. I think it actually could end up being something that pays dividends going through the last couple of weeks of the season. And, obviously, listen, Quentin Johnston's still out there in a bunch of leagues. Josh Palmer's out there in the top leagues. I think those are guys to definitely at least add to your team right now. If you have a bye week, then you're kind of at an advantage because you're going to be able to see what it looks like this week. But obviously at the same time, we're in the fantasy playoffs. And so it depends sort of on how your team is built, because if you had guys who got you there, you're kind of just going for the high floor rather than the ceiling, I feel like, because you don't want your guys to mess up. You don't want that 1 point dud because you thought that a guy might score 20. This is a no nonsense, one and done, unless obviously you play 2 weeks playoff. And so it's an interesting situation, but at the same time, I feel like those are two guys that you can potentially go out and grab. stash them into your bench right now. Even eventually play them if you're in a bind there at wide receiver.
Agreed, Brett. Definitely.
All right, so we jump into our next right here. Quarterback CJ Stroud is not practicing today. We just got the news down a couple hours ago, and then follow up that he officially was on the practice report as they did not participate. Zach, this Texans team, I feel like, started out with such amazing expectations, and we've just seen them just absolutely get carved in the last couple of weeks with injuries. What's the outlook right now on if you have the Texans and any of those guys?
So, I mean, it's difficult, Brett, because another guy is Nico Collins, who's dealing with an injury right now. But obviously, Stroud, it all starts with him. It really, this offense runs through him. If he's not playing, can you really trust anybody in this offense? That's the question mark. They do have a matchup against Tennessee where not a great pass defense, although they looked pretty good the other day against Miami. Still not a great passing defense so far this year. They're a really strong run defense, so that's something to look out for. And in most cases, when you see, okay, a quarterback's out, you probably rely on the run game. Well, this is not the matchup for that. This is probably the worst possible matchup to start one of those running backs, whether it's Pierce or Singletary. I do think, looking at it, if Stroud plays, then you're going to start your guys who are healthy right now. If Nico Collins is in there, of course, you're going to start him. And then you got a couple long shots in Noah Brown, probably going to be the number one guy if Nico Collins can't go. Dalton Schultz, still a question mark. I think he's questionable right now to play. So a lot of question marks, and you got to keep monitoring it throughout the week. But Brett, I mean, it's the fantasy playoffs right now. If Stroud's not playing, I don't know if I can trust anybody. I really don't know who I can put in my lineup. People could say Nico Collins, but I'm not positive that he's going to get the numbers that you're expecting and the numbers that can get you over the line versus somebody who if you may go back and forth between Nico Collins and another guy on your bench.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, obviously last week it was a tough matchup. They were playing against the Jets. Stroud gets banged up in the middle of the game. He's missing his top target to start the game. Then he's missing his other top targets to, not even a in. And so he's without his top two targets, and they can't get the run going. And, it was just kind of disaster. Weather not good. And then you see this kid on the other side of the field who everybody sort of wrote off, and he's dealing. And so not a great feeling for Stroud. A lot of pressure going onto this week. Then he gets hurt. So, obviously now heading into this week, this is the fantasy playoffs. And so if Stroud is not in, I'm staying away from everybody. If Stroud is in, I think it becomes a different story. You can play your guys. The only one I would be a little cautious on is, like you just said, the tight end Dalton Schultz. Just because I'm not sure he's going to be 100%. He is listed as questionable, like you just said. You probably have better options over there at tight end. Only reason I say it is because Brevin seems to be factoring in a lot more here on these snap counts. And so, I think that they're going to utilize him. As far as the snaps go, it might mean less work for Dalton Schultz.
Yeah, that's fair, Brett. Definitely a good point there, and something to really monitor all of these Houston players. Just something to monitor as the days go on, because it's a big decision here with any of these guys. If Stroud can go, if he can't go, all comes down to the wire.
Yeah, it's just kind of crazy how a turn of a dime here we see the Houston situation, but that's just how the NFL sort of is nowadays. Let's jump to our next story here. We got two guys who are potentially questionable this week. Let's start with Justin Jefferson. Zach, I mean, this is a guy who we've been waiting since week 5 for him to come back. Finally, he takes his time, comes back. Quarterback situation, not that great. We'll get to that in a bit. Gets catches, 27 yards, quickly leaves with an injury. And now it's sort of like, wait a second, that we're going to get Justin Jefferson that we want? Or are we not? I think he'll play. He's already said he's going to play. I don't know that they're going to hold him back. However, quarterback situation now, we have to factor that in. They take Josh Dobbs out. They put Nick Mullins in. Mullins goes 9 of 13 for 83 yards. Does that change the outlook at all for what a Justin Jefferson can do? Because maybe there's less of a running quarterback.
So what I will say, and I'm a Jefferson owner, and it hurt me last week. I ended up being knocked out of the playoffs in one of our leagues, Brett. Like, you got to start Justin Jefferson. It doesn't matter who's playing quarterback. He's Justin Jefferson. You drafted him probably number 1, number 2 overall, wherever it was. You drafted him that high, you're putting him in your lineup. It doesn't matter. Like, he's locked into your lineup if he's playing. I think, yes, you got to limit expectations based on the quarterback. And Nick Mullins looked okay. Like 9 for 13 is not bad. 83 yards. Yeah, I got to work on it. But it was obviously later in that game. And Josh Dobbs, it's hard to sit here and blame quarterbacks, Brett, but you cannot put your top receiver in a situation like that. He left him out to dry. He put him right in harm's way with that ball. And I mean, that can't happen. Like, you kind of teach quarterbacks. These coaches have started to teach their quarterbacks, like, what's a good throw and what's not a good throw. And obviously big hits in football, like, they're dangerous and they can knock these guys out for a while. So luckily Jefferson, like you said, he told reporters today that he's going to play. So you're going to lock him into your lineup. Yes, you are going to limit expectations a little bit, but he's Justin Jefferson. I'm not too worried. And I think there's other things to worry about in your lineup besides Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, he's Justin Jefferson. Just like you said, I think that they're going to obviously have to change how they played from last week, where it was 3-0. One of them, probably the most boring game that the NFL slate gave us in week 14. Now they play Cincinnati, a bit of a different situation. It's going to be backup versus backup. The defenses, both sides, haven't been amazing. And so, this is the opportunity for there to be a little more of a higher scoring game here. Some yardage, some routes that open up some open receivers here. So I'm putting Justin Jefferson in. I think that, TJ Hawkinson, listen, the whole team had a disappointment. In a 3-0 game, you're never going to get that sort of performance. Hawkinson, Addison, like, I think that they'll all be okay this week. And like I just said at the top, I think that not having Josh Dobbs in there means less running for the quarterback. I think Nick Mullins is, he's done the San Francisco offense. And so that's sort of where he was molded. And so it was, a lot of, yes, there are some bootlegs that are worked into it, but for the most part, you're just throwing it on the run more so than anything. And so I think that we've seen that quite a bit here in Minnesota of how that offense is supposed to go. Obviously, they have Kirk Cousins as their lead guy doing it. Sort of got away from that for that Dobbs mania over the last couple of weeks. I think they're going to sort of try to go back to that of what they had at the beginning of the season as they push forward here.
Yeah, definitely fair, Brett.
All right, and so then we have the other option here, the other injury here, and that's the Tyreek ankle. Goes down, not great. A lot of gas from the fantasy community, and rightfully so. It's a guy that is one of the top scoring options in all of fantasy at any position. And then Tuesday, he was considered day-to-day, was told that he was going to be iffy. Then he misses practice. He's listed as questionable. And so, listen, it's Wednesday. We're going to monitor what's going on here. But, this is one of those weeks where, the Tyreek owner in our league has a bye. And so thank God for that. Kind of locked into the bye there. And so it doesn't have to worry about having him out there. But for the teams that do, like, this is really scary because, as far as the receiver position goes, there's a lot of boom or bust options that we've been seeing these last couple weeks after that first big wave. And even some of the bigger guys have had these boom and bust weeks. We've seen it with the Eagles, where A. Brown can score 30 points and then the next week scores like 4. It's just been how it is this year. So if Miami doesn't have Tyreek, how much does that actually boost Waddle's value, knowing that they're going into a tough matchup against a really good secondary.
So I
In the
mean,
New York Jets, I should say.
yeah, I think it boosts it a little bit, Brett, but I wouldn't say much.
Yeah.
There's a couple of different ways you can go on it. I feel like they have two running backs that they'll probably rely on heavily in Mostert and Achan. Obviously, I think one of them is questionable too. So everybody's dealing with injuries right now. So there's just a lot of injuries going around. But as for Waddle, I don't think it increases it too much. I think he'll get more targets, of course, but I don't know if that's going to lead to a ton of fantasy points. If he gets into the end zone, then of course, yeah, that gives it a big boost. But this Jets defense is really, really tough to go up against, and they're going to give them a hard time, Miami. The question here for me, and I am also one of the Tyreek owners who actually received a bye this week in one of my other leagues. That hopefully is a blessing in disguise, Brett. Thank God I received a bye because I was worried about that. I ended up just quick shout out DeAndre Hopkins. I ended up having Tyreek and Hopkins. Hopkins went insane, won me the week, and gave me that bye. So thank you, DeAndre Hopkins. But as for Tyreek Hill, I think it's one to just you got to keep monitoring. It's they said day to day. I wouldn't be surprised if they held him out this week, Brett. I would not be surprised. I think just long-term health of him, it's probably the best decision. And they are going up against the Jets. Like, they're at home. You expect them, even though the Jets have been playing well, you expect them to win this game with their defense, with the other guys that they have in this offense. I think looking at that, I would say probably they're better off holding him out for this game.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is one of those seasons where they're looking at the Super Bowl, plain and simple. I think that they're pretty well, determined they're going to be the playoff team. They're one of the highest scoring offenses in all of football right now. And so I think they're being a little cautious here. Actually, if you take a look at the practice report from today, they held out not only HN, but also Mostert, also Hill. All three of them sat out today. So, yeah, I think that this is going to be a more conservative approach here. I also know that the team that they're playing against, they embarrassed on Black Friday. And so you're expecting that the Jets are going to come into this one. Obviously, they're riding high off a game where their quarterback came in and basically lit the room on fire, started slinging it more. And so I think this is going to be one of those revenge type games. And so knowing that, I think you take a more conservative approach here, try to not get your guy hurt. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we did see Tyreek sit out, or at least, if he was active, not get the sort of work that he normally would. I think they're going to be very conservative about that. That said, Waddle also got hurt, if you remember, to the beginning of this past week. Came right back in, but he got absolutely rocked on a ball over the middle. And so had to go to the tent. And then quickly, when Tyreek got hurt, Waddle came running back in. He was okay. Like he said, it was like his ribs, but he was good. Came in. He had 6 of 8 targets, 79 yards. So to me, that still puts him. Listen, if Tyreek is not in, he definitely belongs in the wide receiver conversation. Not sure he's going to hit wide receiver 1 numbers, though, just based on the matchup alone. But he's certainly is a solid wide receiver 2, especially if Tyreek's not there.
Agreed, Brett. If he's going to get that target share, then you boost him a little bit. But of course, the matchup is one of the toughest in the NFL, and you got to just look at that first before making a huge decision.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump into our standouts of the week. And Zach, let's start out first in Jacksonville with Evan Ingram. He had 11 catches for 95 yards and 2 touchdowns, 12 targets on this one, and finishes with a sweet 32.5 standard PR points. Zach, I mean, we've been seeing these games from tight ends this year where they just pop off for 25 plus points. Pretty awesome to see, just because it hasn't been the Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews show every single week. It's been sort of everybody else.
Yeah, Brett, and just unreal stuff from Evan Ingram that he was able to put this game up in a pretty tough matchup. Cleveland's a really tough defense, and he made it look easy there. Obviously, top two finishes the last 2 weeks. He was 2 last week against Cincinnati on Monday night, and then he finished first in the tight end rankings in this past week against Cleveland. Just unreal stuff here, and you kind of had to expect this a little bit coming into this game with Trevor Lawrence banged up. We last week weren't sure if he was going to play. Kind of limited things for a lot of guys in Jacksonville that we were talking about. He ended up sucking it up. He played, and obviously they lost in the game, but Evan Ingram had a really, really good game. And like I said, it was expected with Lawrence a little bit banged up, going to the tight end a little bit more. And I mean, it panned out for them. They were down a lot in this game as well. So I feel like they were always playing catch up and just led to more targets for his weapons. Great work from Evan Ingram. You're going to keep starting him. He's I think solidified himself as a tight end one, Brett.
Yeah. Can I just say first, before I even jump into Evan Ingram, Trevor Lawrence coming into the game was insane. I was like, we're hearing all these reports of 6 to 8 weeks he's out or whatever, and then all of a sudden he's at the practice, and then all of a sudden he's playing. And not only is he playing, he's running end arounds. Like, he was doing bootleg runs. Like, it was nuts. He's turning the corner and going full speed. He wasn't limping around. Like, this guy came, and I don't know what they gave him, if they gave him some shots in his ankle or whatnot. But you would never have thought that the guy got hurt a week ago. So kudos to Trevor Lawrence. As far as Evan Ingram goes, thank you, Evan Ingram, because it is him who clinched me my first round bye here on that performance. And yeah, listen, it's been awesome to have Evan Ingram every single week. He's going to get a target share. And then, the last bunch of weeks he had 9 catches 2 weeks ago, and now he has 11 catches past week. It's 2 straight weeks of just awesome ball where it seems like Trevor Lawrence is trying to find Evan Ingram because he knows that that's his safety valve. We've been seeing that a ton, and that's how they've been sort of marching down the field, the Jaguars. And so, listen, I mean, he scored 2 touchdowns this past week. He scored a touchdown the week before. Didn't score any touchdowns for the entire season up until the last 2 games. So something to note there. Quite a late season surge here for Evan Ingram, but he's a tight end one. I'm starting him pretty much every single week.
Definitely, Brett.
Yeah, and the last thing I just want to say on Ingram is his floor is high, and it goes back to what we were just saying as far as the playoffs. I think that is a very reliable guy to have in your lineup. But let's get right into our next guy here, Drake London. Zach, I mean, we've been talking about Drake London, I feel like, the entire season. What is this appointment? What is Arthur Smith doing? They're not throwing the football. All of a sudden, Drake London's starting to come on well towards the end of the season. He had 11 targets in this game, 10 catches, 172 yards. He didn't score a touchdown, but it didn't matter. I think this proved that Evan Ingram, that Drake London could be a very solid flex option going down here in the next couple of weeks here in the playoffs.
I think he could be, Brett. I'll believe it when I see it. The one thing I'll say about Drake London is this was a great week, and he did it against a secondary that I've talked countless amount of times that it's sliced bread going through these guys this year. It's just been one of the easiest secondaries to play against, and Drake London had an absolute field day against them. The one thing I'll say is I'm just going to look to this week and say could end up being a rough day for a guy like Drake London because they could be up in this game. They could just rely on the run game. Who's to say they're just not going to be up? Like, they're going to be up in this game. They're playing Carolina. So you think they're going to be winning, and a guy like Drake London, he'll get his targets, but I don't know if that's going to be a ginormous fantasy week like he put up here against Tampa Bay. I would say the positives for Drake London is there's a couple weeks going down the stretch. You're right that he can end up booming in the playoffs. I think this week may not be one of them because I think it's just going to be a blowout, but it just kind of shows the inconsistency of most of the guys in this Atlanta offense. Just kind of stands out though, but credit to Drake London, a really, really good week. Ends up finishing as a top 2 wide receiver in PPR. And you like this if you're a Drake London owner. You want to see more of this, and hopefully he can prove me wrong and be consistent in the next couple of weeks, Brett.
Yeah, it's fair. Listen, I mean, we talked touchdown. I just said he didn't score a touchdown. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 4. He's only had 2 touchdowns in the entire season. One came in week 2, one came in week 4. Hasn't scored since then. And so, yeah, there's not that consistency. The whole offense hasn't had that consistency. You talk Carolina in the matchup. They played Carolina week 1. He had 0 catches for 0 yards and only had 1 target because it seemed like they were really just trying to utilize Bijan. And of course, it was week 1. They were trying to figure out what they had in Bijan as far as opening up the playbook a little bit. And obviously, they were playing Carolina. So they were up and simple. And so, yeah, it's a bit of an interesting one. You know, obviously, when he played a couple weeks ago, we just talked Jets secondary, like they shut him down. He had 1 catch for 8 yards, and that was it. And they were forced to throw to Kyle Pitts when they were throwing the ball. That said, I think it's 3 solid matches here. At Carolina, home against Indy, at Chicago. I think 3 potential boom weeks. So I'll be riding Drake London at least into my league as a flex. At least in a very high consideration for my flex spot. I'll say that. Not asking for wide receiver 1 numbers. I don't know that he's going to get that. But double-digit fantasy points. I think that's an attainable thing for each of the next 3 weeks.
Definitely fair, Brad. Just, something to look at for this upcoming week.
Yeah, clearly. So we jump to our last standout here. And Zach, this was a blunder in the past here. Ramondre Stevenson goes down with injury. Comes out that Zeke's going to get this extended share of the work from not only from the rush, but also from the passing game. He does it plain and simple, gets 7 catches, 72 yards, and a touchdown, rushes 22 times for 68 yards, finishes with 27 fantasy points. This was awesome. It was just like watching vintage Zeke. They just kept trying to get him the ball. And now obviously look at the next couple of weeks of what it means for the New England Patriots. And there's a lot of rumbling about the coach right now. I mean, that's just point blank. The elephant in the room is the Bill Belichick noise. Obviously turned away reporters this morning, and we heard all about that. This is not an easy road, though, ahead for Zeke in the next couple of weeks. He's got Kansas City. He has to go to Denver, and then he has to go to Buffalo. Not an easy stretch by any means. Also, with playing Kansas City and with playing Buffalo, maybe not as much on Denver, you're figuring that they're going to have to throw the ball more because they're going to be down in these games. So what does that actually do to Zeke's value going forward as far as, that they might not have very much around him?
So Brett, the biggest question is when Ramondre Stevenson will be healthy again. I think that's the first question when you're looking at Zeke. What's the health of Ramondre? I would say probably Ramondre is going to be out this week. I think they're going to hold him out for 1 more week, and then maybe he gets week 16 against Denver. Just something to look at. Also, I'm a Ramondre owner in the playoffs right now, so kind of waiting on that news. I think they're going to hold him out for this week and give Zeke the full role against Kansas City. Brett, I think this is going to be a great week for Ezekiel Elliott. I do, because even though, it's a tough matchup, Kansas City's defense is pretty good. This guy got 22 carries last week for 68 yards. Not crazy. 3.1 yards per carry. Didn't get a touchdown, but he got 7 receptions on 8 targets for 72 yards and a touchdown. 7 receptions. I think Ezekiel Elliott ran back 5 years to get 7 receptions. That was unbelievable. So I mean, you cannot tell me that they probably won't be down in this game to Kansas City. Probably going to be down in this game. I mean, yes, Kansas City has not been good, but I think the Chiefs have more motivation than ever than before to win a football game and probably make a statement. I think that's a perfect recipe for Zeke because Bailey Zappi proved that, yeah, he's probably just going to throw the ball short. Like check downs, get it to the running back, get it to the tight end. Maybe you get a couple targets to receivers here and there, but like this main thing I feel like is going to run through Zeke, run through the tight ends, and then maybe Juju, who's going to maybe be the top guy if DeMario Douglas is out. That's all depending on wide receiver injuries, but I think it's going to run through Zeke. And this week, I mean, I wouldn't put him in running back 1 category yet, but I think he definitely has a solid spot as an RB2 right now for this upcoming week, just based on the role he's going to have in this offense.
I agree. I think he's basically going to be the focal point of the offense. It seems like Bill Belichick is going to treat him like the Zeke Elliott of the Cowboys, of that lead role that he played and for so many years was so successful doing it, that ground and pound football. I think we're going to see that a lot. And then, yeah, the passing game he's started to get into, and I think that's going to continue also. We've sort of seen it for the bulk of the season, of him trying to get Zeke out wide and catching passes and things like that. And obviously now with Ramondre not even there, at least for this week, yeah, I agree. He becomes a wide receiver. He becomes a running back too. And listen, he'll perform like a wide receiver. So I think that puts him into the upper echelon there of the running back 2 rankings, probably about the mid-teens, mid to early teens in terms of an overall ranking.
Definitely, Brett. Should be a good matchup for him this week.
So let's jump right into our game previews. We got some Thursday night football followed by some Saturdays. We'll start with the Thursday nighter. It's the Los Angeles Chargers taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. Zach, let's just briefly touch on the Chargers. We already talked about it at the top of the show, but it'll be Easton Stick, and Keenan Allen has been ruled out. So who exactly do you see as a potential starter here for the Chargers?
I think it's Austin Eckler. That's pretty much it, Brett. I mean, I think Quentin Johnston, you can maybe just throw a dart and say, all right, maybe it's Quentin Johnston, throw him in my lineup as a flex, but it's playoff time. And Quentin Johnston hasn't stepped up before. I don't think he's going to all of a sudden be as reliable as you think, putting him in your lineup this week. Maybe as the top target, I'd stay away from a ton of these guys. Yeah, it could happen for tight end. Not in the fantasy playoffs. It's Austin Eckler, and that's it for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, as far as, rosterable players, I took a flyer on Josh Palmer just because I was like, listen, Josh Palmer's been playing this role with Keenan Allen alongside for the whole year. Quentin Johnston, he was sort of the third guy. And he was even the fourth guy when Mike Williams was still healthy. And so I kind of still see that. And obviously, Josh Palmer's coming off IR. They said he's going to be limited. I don't believe that. I don't believe Brandon Staley. I think that he's going to be full go because they're going to need him to be full go. So, I mean, as far as it goes with who I am actually starting this week in fantasy playoffs, Austin Eckler, and that's it. But as far as rosterable players, I think that taking a flyer on Josh Palmer is very smart here. I think that there is the opportunity that he pops off here, though.
Yeah, that's definitely fair, Brett. And I'll just jump right into the Vegas Raiders because they have a lot of question marks themselves. So right now, of course, O'Connell's going to be a quarterback for them. Josh Jacobs is a question mark. I believe he did not practice today, Brett. So that's something
any day.
He didn't
hasn't practiced Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday.
Got it. So that's huge. I think you got to look at that if he plays, which a little unlikely. you're going to end up going with probably just Devontae Adams, I would say. We're just kind of looking playoff terms, like that's the guy you trust. It's going to end up being Devontae because you can't really sit him. That's something to definitely look at. I think he's probably in a wide receiver 2 range because it's kind of a little bad there with Aiden O'Connell as his quarterback. It hasn't been great for Devontae, but like I said, you got to keep starting him. And I think you can look at a guy like Jacoby Myers, but I'm not expecting big time numbers. A low end flex if you really feel like it. I think this game is just going to be pretty bad, Brett. I'm not going to lie. I think it's just going to be a defensive battle and 2 teams going head to head for a division win.
Yeah, I agree. It's actually monitor some reports here. Devontae did miss practice today. He had an illness, and so not sure how bad it is if he'll actually play tomorrow. But yeah, I would at least monitor those reports because if he's not in, then I think that Jacoby Myers does become a start. I would put him in my lineup, especially if Josh Jacobs isn't going as well. They're going to have to go to Jacoby Myers. I think that the target share has been there for him pretty much the whole season. And now if you're, sort of force feeding him, then he gets the appeal there. And obviously, a guy like Hunter Renfrow might get some points as well, but you're not starting him unless it's a very deep league. So yeah, I would say I agree with you. I am not sure that Josh Jacobs will play this weekend, or tomorrow rather. And Devontae, just kind of monitor reports. And if he can go, yeah, you're putting Devontae in because he's Devontae and he's going to get his work. But if he can't go and he's still sick, then Jacoby Myers is the start for me.
Definitely fair, Brett.
All right, so we jump into our next game here. It is Minnesota, Cincinnati, and yeah, we talked Minnesota at the top of the show. So just briefly, I mean, it was a throwaway game for me. It was a 3-0 game where nothing really was going for either team last week. And so if you have Justin Jefferson, you're not shying away from it. He's going in there as long as he's playing. I would say that Alexander Mattison becomes a little bit of a interesting one just because we saw towards the end of the game, and yeah, it was 3-0, but we saw Ty Chandler actually mix into 8% of the snaps in the second half. So to me, it's a little bit of an interesting one. Obviously, he hurt his ankle, Madison as well. So to me, playing against Cincinnati, it becomes a little bit of a rougher play for me. I probably would say that Madison drops to a flex option.
Yeah, I mean, this one's another one to monitor, Brett. I think Madison could end up being out for this one. Like, yeah, we don't know just yet. But this is also Saturday, 1:00. So it kind of changes things. You're one day ahead of schedule there. They could end up holding him out for a week. Just a shortened week for them. I would say if Ty Chandler and Madison's out and Ty Chandler, probably a flex for me. I would say he's a streamer. Pick him up and throw him in your lineup if you need a guy. I know in one of my matchups, I had Madison on my team. I picked up Ty Chandler on the waiver this morning. I'll throw him in to replace him. Like, why not? I think Ty Chandler will get a bulk of carries. And if he falls into the end zone and he gets that volume, you got a perfect guy off the waiver wire. So that all depends on Madison. Obviously, monitor it as the week goes on, but pick up Ty Chandler. Definitely, if you haven't already, and if he's still available on the waiver wire, pick him up because I think he could be a very valuable piece to anybody's roster, especially as we get into the playoffs right now, Brett.
Yeah, and then obviously you're going to start TJ Hawkinson, but as far as the receivers go, listen, we said Justin Jefferson, but I think this week at least, depending on the situation of Justin Jefferson, based on what the quarterback situation, then I think that Jordan Addison might actually stay on my bench this week if I was playing a lineup, because I think there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of unknown. We don't know what the quarterback situation is going to look like with Nick Mullins versus Josh Dobbs. So, I'm seeing that NC approach. And yes, I understand that Addison could have one of those big games, catch one of those 50-yard bombs like he does. I'd rather that happen on my bench this week than the possibility of him having 2 catches for 12 yards.
I agree with you, Brett. Just a very high risk there, and we cannot do that at this time of year.
Yeah, it's about the high floor for me. And then as far as Cincinnati goes, listen, it's another interesting situation because their quarterback situation seems pretty okay. So that means you're starting Joe Mixon. I think plain and simple, he's been very good for them. Chase Brown got a lot of work. I don't know that I'm staying with Chase Brown, though. I don't know that I think the floor is way low on him. I get that he had a good week. 3 catches, 8 yards, scored a touchdown. But after that, I mean, it's Jamar Chase potentially, depending. Obviously, he's listed as question right now, and so think he'll be okay. But as far as it goes, other than that, like I'm staying away from T. Higgins right now. Probably a desperation flex play for me because it's just so wishy-washy.
Agree with you, Brett. It's a desperate play. That's exactly how I would put it myself. And then, of course, you're starting Chase and Mixon. I think those 2 locks in your lineup, and that's pretty much it for Cincinnati at this time of year.
Yeah, and just quickly on Joe Mixon because I just want to touch on him. The next 3 weeks, he's got Minnesota, at Pittsburgh, and at Kansas City. I think he's matchup proof in both of those Pittsburgh and Kansas City games. I think that is a guy who can end up winning a title for your team. He's been very reliable. The workload has been there basically every single week. Yes, last time he played against Pittsburgh, he only had 8 rushes. It was a different kind of game where they were sort of forced to throw the ball. I don't think we're going to see that. I think that they've figured out a way that Joe Mixon's going to get work each and every week. And he's rewarded with double-digit fantasy points every single week. So he's a guy that's locked in there and potentially can pop off and win you a title.
Agreed with you, Brett.
All right, so let's jump over to Pittsburgh versus Indianapolis. Zach, it's an interesting situation now at quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mitch Trubisky is the starter now. And last week we saw a bit of it was I don't even know how to word it because he was playing against a bad team, and so he played really well. So I guess it's a fluke, but also at the same time, like I can understand why people are like, "Hey, wait a second here. I'm in a deep superflex league. Do I start Mitch Trubisky?" If you're in a bind, yeah, obviously you start Mitch Trubisky coming off of a good game. I'm not going to start Mitch Trubisky, though. I'm not a believer in the offense. I'm a believer in Najee Harris still. I'm a believer in Jaylen Warren still. But I'm not a believer in the offense. And so, no, I'm not starting Mitch Trubisky this week. But I understand the hype that was built around the last game. And, yes, he was playing New England. And so I think that people need to, back off a little bit and put that in perspective. As far as it goes with Deontay Johnson, I feel like he's a flex play. And I don't know that he's much more just because we've seen the dud weeks. And so, yeah, I'm going to say that Deontay's probably a flex play for me. It depends obviously on your situation. If you're stacked it wide though, I'm staying away from him just based on quarterback.
Yeah, Brett. I mean, the biggest thing I'll say, my biggest league, playoffs, need a win. Of course, it's playoff time. Deontay Johnson is my second wide receiver. He's on my bench. He's on my bench this week. Yeah. I do not trust it at all. I really don't. And I know Trubisky threw the ball 35 times last week. I just think it's so heavy risk here with any of the Steelers wide receivers, whether it's Johnson or Pickens. Like, I just cannot sit here and say confidently that they're going to have a great game. I think Deontay had a good game last week, an okay game, but it made it look okay because he had the touchdown, number one. And number two, he got a 22-yard reception with 15 seconds left. So, I mean, all of a sudden that saves the day and he comes out with 14 fantasy points. I think you look at that and I'm not somebody who's going to say, okay, Deontay Johnson, lock him in your lineup. Like he's going to be good this week. I can't say that. I would say he's a flex. And if you need to start him, then of course start him. Like that's the only situation. I'm one of those people that kind of have a little bit of backup behind him. And I'm going with other options this week. And I'll say the same for Pickens. He's not on the radar this week. And as for the running backs, you can kind of go either way, I think, Brett. Of course, Warren is probably in that range also with Najee Harris. They're probably about the same in terms of projections for this week and the matchup overall. I would say both of them are low-end RB2s to flex plays. I think that's about it.
Yeah, and as far as Indianapolis goes, listen, it's an interesting situation at running back. Doesn't seem like Jonathan Taylor is going to be back this so Moss. Listen, it's a good matchup for him. I get that the Steelers have a strong looking defensive front. They've allowed 117 yards per game to running backs, and so he's probably a higher end running back too, even this week, just because he's going to get the workload. As far as it goes at receiver, Michael Pittman's a wide receiver 1 right now. I also think that that's a guy who could potentially win your league because of where you drafted him and who you might have on your team alongside him. That's a guy that definitely got you to the playoffs, can definitely push you over the edge. And then as far as it goes with Gardner Minshew, listen, it's a tough one. You probably have better options elsewhere, but I can understand from the Superflex standpoint, they've been rolling. And so Gardner's, he has a high floor. He just has a low ceiling. So, if you're comfortable with that, I think that Gardner's not a bad play in Superflex leagues, especially deeper ones.
Agree on all fronts there, Brett. And I mean, just quickly on Zach Moss, it hasn't been the best couple of weeks recently. And of course, when you look at that, it's because of the matchups. Like it has not been easy matchups for him. Tennessee's one of the toughest in the NFL. And then Cincinnati's also a tough matchup. And they were losing for a lot of that game. So the good part about that is they really relied on him as well in the passing game. And he got those receptions on 8 targets. He had 4 receptions. So, I mean, if he turns one of those loose, like all of a sudden it's a really, really good week for him. I think that could happen this week against Pittsburgh, but I feel like they'll get the run game going with him. I wouldn't be too worried about him heading into this week.
All right, so we got a viewer question here from Chandler, and let's jump in as I get that up there. Should I start Josh Allen or Brock Purdy? And we'll just answer that part first here.
I would say it's going to end up it's a tough one, Brett. I'm going to end up saying Josh Allen because he's at home. Yep. But I would not be opposed if you went with Purdy. I'm going to say Josh Allen because I think just the upside of Allen, I don't know. I'm a big Allen owner, and I believe in him a lot.
Yeah, I agree, actually. I think I would take Josh Allen in this one. Obviously, you didn't pick Brock Purdy to be your starter. I think, again, it's the same thing as what we've been talking about pretty much the whole show. You need the high floor. You're going to get big numbers each week with Josh Allen. You're never going to have that dud game where you score single digits, and hopefully I didn't just jinx them. But I'm playing Josh Allen. I like the matchup. Obviously, I understand they're playing Arizona and all that. This could be a game where the starters even come out because they don't want to risk injury or whatnot in San Francisco. So I think that, Dallas against Buffalo is going to be a shootout. So therefore, I'm taking Josh, and I think that, he will probably rush for a touchdown in this game.
Yeah, I think, Brett, just looking at those two, it's very hard to say one or the other for this week. But I feel like when you look at the floor, Josh Allen, even in a bad game, puts up 20 points or so. Even in a bad game. I mean, this could be a tough game against Dallas. You're probably still going to get 20 points out of them, at least. just because he does so much. Brock Purdy, you mentioned kind of the blowout potential. That could end up coming into play. Yes, Arizona has gotten better over the last couple of weeks, but I'm not expecting Purdy, like he has done in the last 2 weeks against Philly and Seattle, two pretty solid teams, to go for over 300 yards and multiple touchdowns. I'm not expecting a monster week like the previous two from Purdy, just because I think it's going to be a blowout early.
And then as far as the second question here, Quentin Johnston with Keenan Allen out, or Calvin Ridley or Terry in his PPR league. Zach, who you got?
You go first on this one. I'm not sure yet, just yet.
All right. So I think that, we talked about it at the top of the show. Keenan Allen being out definitely changes things. I also think that the quarterback situation changes things in what could be a pretty low score game. So knocking Quentin Johnston out, it's between Terry McLaurin and Calvin Ridley. I think for me, I'm going with Calvin Ridley just because I think that the pop potential is there. I also like having a Sunday night game versus a Sunday afternoon game. A little bit of an advantage. It's just a superstitious thing. If you need points to catch up, or you kind of know where you're at a little bit. But I just think that the opportunity for him to pop off the opportunity for one of these guys to pop off is going to be coming from Calvin Ridley. So I'm in him.
I agree with you, Brett. I do, because you mentioned it. It's between Ridley and Terry. And just looking at Terry recently, yes, they're coming off a bye now, and things could change, but I feel like I just haven't seen enough overall this season from Terry McLaurin to actually really believe in him heading into a playoff week. I think Ridley is the safer option, definitely. Of course, Lawrence will probably be healthier and healthier as the weeks go on. They're also at home in this one, so that kind of changes things. Versus if it was in Baltimore, I would say probably stay away. It's at home. I think they can end up getting Calvin Ridley a ton of targets, just like they did for a couple of other guys this past week.
Yeah, and listen, as far as Ridley goes, just take it last week. He had 13 targets. Yes, the output wasn't that great, but the input was. He had 4 catches for 53, but third target. I think that that's something you can't really shy away from. I think that they're going to look to continue to get better. And then obviously the next week after that, we had a really good matchup in Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I'm riding Ridley the rest of the way. I think that he's a guy that is a potential league winner here.
Definitely, Brett.
All right, so let's jump into our next preview here. And thank you, Chandler, for the question. We go to the Detroit Lions, who have 16 different scenarios in which they can clinch a playoff game this week. And they head to Ford Field and host the Denver Broncos. And so, Zach, let's quickly just break down Detroit. It wasn't that great of a week for a David Montgomery owner. Kind of saw a bit of the what the floor could be. So now it's a little bit of a risky play, I think, but I'm still going with David Montgomery. I don't think that that I'm shying away from it, even with a lower production week here.
That's fair, Brett. I think it's pretty simple. We almost say it every week with Detroit. Start your guys. They're all going to end up being in your lineup. Laporta, St. Brown, and the 2 running backs in Gibbs and Montgomery. And it's always a question week in, week out of Jared Goff. I'm in a situation where he's my only option behind a guy like Justin Herbert, who I lost for the rest of the year. So I'm going to be going with him. I'm not going to say it's a great matchup. It's just right in the middle. It's just an average matchup for him. I think he could end up getting some amount of fantasy points. I'm not expecting a monster week for him because I think Denver's defense has been better as the weeks have gone on. But that's basically it. Start your guys for Detroit.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I keep looking at the upcoming schedule. Just Denver at Minnesota at Dallas. Pretty good matchups. I think that all 3 of those defenses haven't been amazing against quarterbacks. So, yeah, I think the floor is really high on Goff. He's been very solid for the majority of the season. minus 1 week, I would say, out of the season. Like, he's been really good for the bulk of the season. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think that he's a pretty good play. As far as it goes in Denver, take a look at Javonte Williams. He had 17 carries, 66 yards, and a touchdown, 3 catches, 25 yards. I think he probably justified himself into a running back 2 situation, but also I'm a little cautious because that Detroit front has been very good for the bulk of this season as well. In Hutchinson getting into the backfield, I think that that's going to cause a little bit of a stir for the receivers as far as that goes. So I think it's Javonte, but I'm a little cautious on everyone else. I would say Courtland Sutton's probably a flex play.
Yeah, I would probably agree with you there. I think Courtland Sutton and Javonte are the two that I'll keep on the radar. I want to say a quick thing on Russell Wilson because there could be people looking at him. The one thing I'll say on Russell Wilson is, yes, there's kind of a floor there, but I feel like the upside's just non-existent, Brett. I think that's the one thing that's holding me back from him. He's going to get his points and he's going to get his yards each and every week. A classic, I feel like just going back to an old guy in Matt Ryan, he kind of did the similar thing where you kind of just know what you're going to get each week in whatever offense he was in. You'll get the completions, you'll get the 250 yards or so, or maybe even a little less than that, 2 touchdowns and an interception. Like, it kind of happens each and every week. I stole a line there from our good guy, Matthew Berry, who we watched a lot. Just a classic Matt Ryan week there. So that's the one thing with Russell Wilson. I feel like the upside is just not there. He's had 2 top 10 weeks at the quarterback position, and neither of them have come since, I think it was week 4. Yeah, week 4 was the last time he was in the top 10. So it's not all of a sudden going to start. I know people are high on him. Start him in Superflex, but in redraft, I would look at other options.
Yeah, I agree. Let's jump right into our next game here. It is the Jets as they head down to Miami to take on the Dolphins. As we head into our Sunday slate here, Zach, let's quickly just touch on the Jets here. Zach Wilson had an amazing performance last week. This might not be as kind to him, but he had 301 yards, completed 27 passes, threw 2 touchdowns, and did not throw an interception. And so, heading into this week now, do you think that Zach Wilson is a startable Superflex option?
Nah, I don't know, Brad. I think, yeah, he could end up being a like low end, I guess, super flex option, a low end quarterback too. But I'm not insanely confident. It's in Miami. I think last week was a little bit of a situation where they're pretty good at home, Brett. They've been pretty good at home. When Wilson has been that quarterback, we've seen a fair amount of close games that they've had this year. Of course, the couple of games that they lost pretty heavily, he wasn't in there at quarterback. So I feel like the home field advantage for them really kind of helps this Jets team out a little bit more. It gives them difficult when they start heading on the road. I feel like just the moment gets a little bit too big for some of these guys. And in Miami, I don't know if it's going to be an easy matchup. Miami's defense has been pretty good, even though, of course, the collapse the other day. But minus that, like they've been a really solid defense. I would probably put them in low end quarterback 2 range in terms of super flex. But the rest of the guys, like Breece Hall, is clearly in your lineup. Garrett Wilson, you may need to make a decision.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's sort of a weird situation because I think that with Garrett Wilson, yes, I think that they've figured out that they're going to try to sling the ball here with Zach Wilson. He's got nothing to lose and all of that. That's great. 9 catches in this past game, 108 yards. He had 14 targets. I think I am starting Garrett Wilson based on the fact that I think that they're going to try to continue to figure out ways to get him the ball, getting back to the basics. It all just basically comes down to third downs, though, because that seemed to be what was holding them back. They couldn't convert on third down. Drives were just quickly ending. And so getting the first downs on first and second down actually let them last week open up the playbook quite a bit more, got Garrett Wilson involved a ton. So, yes, Breece Hall, you're starting. I'm going to start Garrett Wilson this week because I think that they'll continue to get him the ball. And I agree with you as far as Zach goes, rather next week's matchup where he takes on the Washington Commanders rather than this week where he takes on Miami.
Definitely fair, Brendan. And the last time, just a couple of weeks ago, Garrett Wilson went up against Miami. Yeah, that one was a blowout, and Tim Boyle, of course, was that quarterback, but 7 receptions on 10 targets, only 44 yards, but I feel like that number will rise. He also had a touchdown in the game, but I feel like that 44 yards will boost up a little bit with Zach Wilson at quarterback.
Yeah, and just, I mean, we spoke about Miami, like start your guys, but also monitor those reports as we go forward in the week. Tyreek, Devon Achane, and Raheem Mostert all missed practice today. We're going to see how they take it. And talked about earlier in the show, I think that this could be a week where they just hold Tyreek out, revenge game, and they're kind of just being at the long run here.
Yeah, definitely agree, Brett.
All right, so jumping to our next game here, it is the Tennessee Titans as they host the Houston Texans. Zach, we talked C.J. Stroud at the top of the show, so let's start out in Tennessee, where it was D-Hop. Some amazing catches there, 7 catches, 124 yards, scores a 3-yard score, but he got 12 targets in this one. Zach, I bet DeAndre Hopkins also seems to be a guy who sort of went downhill towards that middle, of the season and has sort of turned the corner. And now it seems like that's a guy who could end up being in your lineup these last couple of weeks here in the season.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, thank you for my bye week, DeAndre Hopkins. I appreciate it. I think he's a wide receiver too for a fair amount of time now. I think that's just probably the spot for him. Because people were shaky on him early, it was inconsistent. I think now with Levis in at quarterback, it's kind of solidified things as he's the top target. He's going to go to him when he needs help. And these last couple of weeks, of course, Stroud might not be playing, and that's a question mark. But these other games next to it, in the games in the future of Seattle, Houston, Jacksonville, those are going to be closer games, and they're going to try and sling the ball around. They're going to trust Levis's arm because, of course, Derrick Henry, it's kind of been a little bit shaky the last couple of weeks of whether it's a good week or a bad week. And I feel like they go to Hopkins in those kinds of situations, as well as trust Levis's arm to sling it around.
Yeah, and it's a home game here. Henry's actually performed very well in home games. There was that team stretch that you alluded to just then where he did not do so well. But it seems like every single time that they've played at home this season, he has scored double-digit fantasy points. So I'm riding Derrick Henry. I think that Henry is probably a low-end running back 1, very high-end running back 2. That's probably the range that he falls in this week. As long as he continues to get the work. Listen, I understand the appeal of Tajay Spears. And I totally get it. He's still finishing as a top end running back right now, running back 7. And so, you're riding Henry the rest of the way. I don't know that you can kind of go any other way. He's certainly locked in my lineup.
Definitely fair, Brett. Yeah, I agree.
And then just as far as Houston goes, like we just said at the top of the show, sort of monitor what's going on. Obviously, if the quarterback is in, you're kind of going to put your guys in. And if not, then I'm shying away from that entire team.
Yep, agreed.
All right, so let's jump into our next matchup. It is the Green Bay Packers as they host the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at Lambeau Field. Zach, it is a rough time right now in Packerland. Taking a 24-22 loss on the last drive of the game to the New York Giants. There was some pretty good stuff that we saw out of Jaden Reed, out of Tucker Kraft. I mean, there were some good moments here in this game, even though we're going up against a weaker defense. Listen, I understand the sky is falling on a lot of what's going on out there in the Packers because the expectations are always really high. But I think Jaden Reed here is a guy that going forward is going to end up being a flex option, if not more. But I would say it's a guy who has a low floor, but an extremely high ceiling.
I agree with you, Brett. I think a flex play is probably the perfect spot for him right now. Just put him in your flex spot. Like he's a guy that you can definitely rely on, just because of the volume that he gets in this offense. They feed him the ball. They also have a ton of running plays for him. So that's really stood out to me the last couple of weeks. So definitely somebody to rely on. And they have a fantastic matchup this week. I mentioned every single time anybody plays Tampa Bay, start those guys. Yeah, I think Jaden Reed could have a really good week. And depending on the health of Christian Watson, that he probably should be on the flex radar as well. If he's healthy, I would say if he's not healthy, then you kind of go down to Romeo Doubs. I wouldn't put him too much. He's more of a long shot. But just based on this matchup, like it's a really, really good matchup for a guy like Jaden Reed. I would say another thing to monitor is the health of Aaron Jones, because that's been a question mark the last couple of weeks. Obviously didn't play Monday Night Football. If he doesn't play, it's up to you on AJ Dillon. I'd probably stay away because this Tampa Bay front is the best thing about their defense easily. So I'd probably be a little bit hesitant on that. And then I think Jordan Love, Brett, is in a low-end QB1 range for redraft. I do think he's in that range that you probably could be comfortable starting him this week in the playoffs, because it is a good matchup and he can probably feast on this Tampa Bay secondary.
Yeah, so actually, I agree with you on the Love thing. I think that it's you're almost definitely starting him if you're in a super flex league, and he does fall into that low end quarterback one. If you're in a bit of a bind, if you just lost a quarterback via injury, a la Herbert. So I agree with that. As far as the running back situation goes, it's an extremely interesting one because Aaron Jones is practicing very limited right now. And it came out that AJ Dillon has a thumb injury. And so he didn't practice at all the last day. And so he was listed as a non-participant yesterday at walkthrough. He was listed as a non-participant today at practice with that thumb injury. So something to monitor. I think it could potentially be put into a spot where, listen, they're playing for playoff games right now. They might have to put Aaron Jones in there and kind of put him in, even if he's not at 100%, if AJ Dillon can't go. To me, I still think that based on the involvement in the passing game that Aaron Jones has and that they've used for the entire time that he's been on the field, he probably lands it as a running back too, even if he's not at 100%, because I think he's going to get those PPR points. And obviously, if AJ Dillon's not there behind him, they're dealing with Patrick Taylor, and I don't know that that's that much of a thorn in the side as many Packer fans would disagree with.
Yeah, I probably agree with you on that front, Brett.
All right, and as far as Tampa Bay, Zach, I mean, you want to give your weekly Tampa Bay offense rant here?
Weekly Tampa Bay offense. Mike Evans is really good at football. Okay, so you're gonna start him. I would say it's probably gonna be a solid matchup for him. I think looking at everybody else, Chris Godwin still a flex play. Nothing more than that till he actually they've had target after target go his way, but it just hasn't turned into reception. So until he gets that really going on a consistent basis, then I'd feel more comfortable putting him in a lineup, especially heading into the playoffs now. I think Baker is on the super flex radar, definitely not on the redraft radar. And then Rashad White, you're going to start him because just reliable running back. He's going to get his touches as well as his reception out of the backfield. So keep trusting him.
Yeah, I think that Rashad White right now is going to end up being one of those top running backs here in the last couple of weeks. And he's been one of the top running backs, through the first 14 weeks. And so, yeah, I think that that's a guy you kind of ride to championship potentially.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so we go to I almost called him Danny Dimes. We go to our new favorite quarterback in New York, Mr. Cutlet himself. The Giants. Listen, it's an amazing story. What Tommy DeVito has been able to do. I don't know how now you throw him into a situation. We talk about the dome all the time and how tough it is to play in the dome. Now you got Tommy DeVito going in off of high. I don't know how I can start him. I understand there's so much riding it on all that. It's so much fun watching. He's an extremely low superflex play for me. I'm starting Zach Wilson over him. Obviously, I have a bye week, so it doesn't really matter. I don't have to make that decision this week. But I'm not riding Tommy DeVito to a championship. I'm just not.
Shout out Tommy Cutlet for what an insane nickname there. Tommy Cutlet. Good for him, though. Great stretch he's had with the Giants. Start Saquon Barkley. That's all I have to say, Brett, on the Giants.
Yeah, listen, it's been fun to watch Tommy DeVito develop. I'm listening to some New York talk radio here, and there's people proclaiming him as the next one. And people are very quick to crown the next one, and also knock top picks, like Bryce Young. They're already knocking Bryce Young. He's only played how many games in his career. I think it's way too early. They're talking 5 years down the road. We don't know if he's going to be on the team in 5 games. Plain and simple. It's just the speed of the NFL, the speed of the business of the NFL. And so I will say that something to monitor here is the potential that Darren Waller does come back this week. If he's active, it's an interesting one because New Orleans is a bit banged up, and it just, to me, I understand where the Waller appeal is. I'm staying away. I'd rather wait a week to see what it is. If I know I have a solid option there, like an Evan Ingram, for example, like somebody who is going to get points, a Trey McBride, he's going to get targets. Rather than a Darren Waller, just because we haven't seen him in so many weeks. That's kind of where I lie on that one.
Yeah, definitely fair, Brett. And I'll take it to New Orleans. And of course, you're starting Alvin Kamara in this matchup. It's a pretty good matchup here against New York. They have not been great against the run game, so keep riding with him. And then, of course, Chris Olave, you drafted him. He's going to be in your lineup for this week. Probably a wide receiver too. I would put him right in the middle of that range in redraft. And then I think other than that, it's a little bit difficult to go to a couple of other guys. Yeah. I think that's probably about it for me, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Derek Carr has just been too inconsistent for me. And that's the guy that a lot of people point at, even in Superflex leagues. If you have a different Superflex option, I'm not taking Derek Carr. I'm going to try to look elsewhere just for the rest of the season. I think that it's been a long and frustrating season from the quarterback position, especially for the fans of the New Orleans Saints. And so for me, yeah, I'm taking a flyer elsewhere. I think that, again, the Zach Wilson, the Tommy DeVito experience, I would take that over a Derek Carr potential 5-point game. Like, you don't know any given week how many points he can score.
Yeah, definitely, Brett.
All right, so let's jump to our next matchup. And Zach, give us your Bijan Robinson report as Atlanta heads into Carolina. Zach, a juicy matchup here for Bijan, I think.
I think if they do not give Bijan Robinson the ball more than 20 times, I'm going to be so angry, Brett. I really, really am. This is the perfect matchup for him. And yeah, last week it was a little bit difficult for them. They did have a tough one last week, so trying to bounce back after that tough loss to Tampa Bay. But I feel like run defense wise, Tampa Bay is pretty good. I said it's one of the best parts about their defense. They gave him targets though, 5 receptions on 7 targets, 54 yards. He did end up getting a rushing touchdown, Brett. So that was probably the biggest bright spot of the day. He's starting to get touchdowns. After it took him till week 8 to finally get one in the running game. So starting to get him involved there and getting into the end zone. So I'm confident heading into this week. We already talked about a guy like Drake London, who I'm not as confident as some heading into this week. I think it's going to end up being a blowout in Atlanta or in Carolina. Either way, I think it's just going to be all Atlanta in this one. And it's hard to really rely on really anybody else besides Bijan. Kyle Pitts had a great game last week, Brett. I need to see one more week before I believe it.
Yeah, I think Kyle Pitts has been on the list for the do not starts basically the entire season, and so yeah, he had a good week. He scored a touchdown. Obviously, without the touchdown, it doesn't look that great. And so I'm staying away from Kyle Pitts. I think that by now you probably have better options on your roster, especially if you're here in the playoffs. So I'm staying away from him. And then, yeah, I agree with you on the Drake London thing we just spoke about before. So not going to rehash that. Start Bijan. Desmond Ridder. I think that's an interesting one because he came off some pretty awful performances. Goes 26 of 40 for 347 yards, a touchdown. Also adds one on the ground, 4 rushes for 15 yards and a touchdown. And so, yeah, he's in a good situation right now. And, obviously a really good matchup for him against Carolina. And so there is the potential that you do put him in as a super fly option. Wouldn't go any higher than that, obviously. But, who would you rather have, the upside of Desmond Ridder or the potential upside of Derek Carr? Due to the downside, I'm taking Desmond Ridder, believe it or not, in this one.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say on that though is it could be a good matchup based on Carolina's just awful. I feel like their defense, though, their biggest weakness is the run game. So the one thing on that is unless Ritter's getting really involved in the running game, I'd probably end up just giving up on it because, of course, he could get involved in the pass game, but he might not need to. The score might be just too big, and they might just rely on the run game. If he gets involved in that, like I said, then it's a different story. But I think it's a fair risk that you would have to take to really rely on it.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, as far as Carolina goes, this is going to be a long day. I think that Adam Thielen is probably a flex option. I think that, as far as Chuba Hubbard goes, he's probably a lower flex option. He's still a flex option, but I would say that those two guys are flexes, and that's it. I think that it's, wasteland after that. Last week I took Jonathan Mingo, and, it was not great. It was 2 catches for 22 yards. He had a ton of targets. He had 9 targets in this game, but didn't turn out to be what it was. And so, yeah, while it's a great ad in a dynasty league, and, if he's out there in your dynasty league, like, you should go out and grab him. He's out there in a ton of leagues right now. I don't know that I'm taking anybody here on this Carolina team. Obviously, like, if you picked up Thielen via trade or whatever, probably putting him there in your flex. But, I don't see anybody else other than him and Chuba Hubbard as anything more than a flex option.
I completely agree, Brett. And Thielen's case, like, it was better last week. I think you could end up getting some garbage time this week. So I think that's going to end up being what you're looking forward to. At least I am, because a couple tough options. I do have him starting in a couple of leagues this week, Brett.
Yeah, definitely fair. Let's jump to our next game here. It's the Chicago Bears. They head to the Cleveland Browns. Joe Flacco, unreal. 311 yards. He went 26 of 45, 3 touchdowns. He did throw a pick. But I mean, it was pretty awesome. And the beneficiary of that was David Njoku. 6 catches, 91 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had 8 targets in this game. He finishes with a sweet 27.1 standard PPR points. And I mean, you got to start David Njoku, I think, the rest of the season at least.
Clearly, he's definitely in the range, of course, of tight end one. I would definitely keep starting him. As far as everybody else, it's a little bit pick and choose here. I think the biggest thing about Flacco is he really goes to his number one target when he really goes anywhere. I feel like the biggest thing we saw when he was in New York was he just was force feeding Garrett Wilson every time he got the opportunity. He did the exact same against Jacksonville in terms of Amari Cooper, 7 receptions, 77 yards. He ended up getting 14 targets overall. Cooper did have a fumble, which kind of hurt the day a little bit, but I think the 7 receptions and 14 targets shows that Flacco's really going to end up going to his number one guy. So I'd be confident starting him as probably a lower end wide receiver 2, probably in the flex range with upside of wide receiver 2 more than that. And then in terms of Njoku, of course, you're starting. And then the running back room, I would say Jerome Ford, you kind of know what you're getting each and every week. He's going to get his touches. He ended up getting targets out of the backfield. So that was huge. I'd keep relying on him as a flex play as well, Brett.
Yeah, he's had 6 straight games with double-digit fantasy points, and dating back even further than that, he's had 8 out of his last 9 games double-digit fantasy points. And so, yeah, you're riding him, plain and simple. You're putting him in just because the floor is so high, where he's a little banged up right now, so the ceiling might not be as high. But you know that's going to be reliable. I like what you said about Joe Flacco with Garrett Wilson. I totally agree, because that's sort of what it looked like here. He was force feeding Amari Cooper. Therefore, yes, Cooper comes in. You nailed it. The low end wide receiver 2, very high end flex play. You're not benching him, but also you're keeping your expectations where they need to be. And then as far as Njoku goes, yeah, you're playing him at just the last 3 weeks of this season here. Talk week 18 here. Obviously, there's 4 weeks in the season, but the last 3 weeks here in the fantasy season, Chicago at Houston, home against the Jets. I think that those 3 matchups for tight ends, those 3 defenses have not been good against tight ends. And so it's a very juicy end to the schedule here for David Njoku. Definitely three matchups here that can potentially be league winners.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brett.
And then just quickly on Chicago, listen, it's been a long season for Chicago. I think that you're still riding out DJ Moore, obviously. Justin Fields becomes more interesting. Probably a lower end quarterback one. If you have a better option, I can understand why you might go against it, because obviously it's a tougher matchup here. Cleveland defense has been very good this year. The Foreman, I think that's a potential flex option here. Definitely proved his worth last week, rushing for 11 times for 50 yards. Also added 2 catches for 22 yards. So finishing just below double-digit fantasy points. I think he's a potential flex option there. Definitely should be able to add him, because he's out there in 70% of leagues. And you probably have somebody sitting on the end of your bench who there's not going to be a chance that you play him this season, nor will your opponent. So I think that that's a potential option. And looking at the end of your bench is something that you should definitely do. And then as far as Cole Kmet's value goes in this one, he's probably a low-end tight end 1, I would say. Last week he was pretty good. He had 7 targets, 5 catches for 66 yards. Did not score, but he's still probably lower end tight end 1 for me.
Yeah, I agree on all fronts, Brett. I think just looking quickly at that running back room, it's a little bit just like you can go so many different ways on it. I think Foreman's clearly the guy, but I don't know if I trust him enough to be in my lineup. That's the one thing because I know that Fields is going to get his carries, and I know a couple guys maybe behind them in Roshan and one more like and Khalil Herbert can get their carries as well. So I'm kind of a little bit iffy on it. Although Foreman, I do think he's the number one guy there. And what a week Fields and Moore had last week. They took down Detroit in Chicago, and those two were locked in together. So you're going to keep riding with DJ Moore. He's been really hot lately, especially with Justin Fields at quarterback. You're going to keep riding that wave with him.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so let's now jump to our last matchup here in the 1 p.m. window on Sunday. Kansas City heads to Foxborough to take on the New England Patriots. Zach, let's quickly touch on the Patriots here, and we did at the top of the show. Zeke, I'm playing Zeke. You're riding the wave, plain and simple. But after that, Hunter Henry's probably a streamer for me. Probably not playing Bailey Zappi. I know he had a good game against Pittsburgh. Probably not playing him. Staying away from Juju Smith-Schuster entirely. I understand there was the appeal, but I'm fading him this week.
Yeah, it's not an easy matchup, Brett. Like the Kansas City defense, although like some weeks it's been a little bit on and off, they're kind of middle of the pack in rankings. Like they're a tough defense, and they're coming into this matchup wanting a big time win here. They're coming off the loss to Buffalo, some frustrations, of course, from Kansas City. They need to get back to their level of football that we've all seen the last couple of years, and I think they're going to do this and do that in this game. I would stay away from every single person except for Ezekiel Elliott, because I think he's going to have a ton of volume and a lot of receptions out of the backfield, like I mentioned before. Anybody else, yeah, it's a streamer, but I don't trust enough to start them in a playoff matchup.
And I think for the first time this season with Kansas City, I can say start your guys, and that includes Rashee Rice. I think that Rashee Rice has proven he is a very reliable option for Patrick Mahomes. 10 targets last week, and he had 7 catches for 72 yards, scored a touchdown. Kelsey, obviously you're playing him, but Pat Mahomes, I think, is the big question mark in this offense as far as who you're starting. What could you say? It's like, 1 week he's like, okay, we're seeing the Patrick Mahomes, but these last couple weeks it's been like, all right, where's the fantasy output? Plays against Buffalo, it's a tougher matchup. 25 of 43, so he completed 58% of his passes, only for 271 yards, only threw 1 touchdown, also a pick. Only added 1 carry on the ground, and so finishes with 13.64 standard PPR points. Not great for a guy that is regarded as the top option. That said, rest of the season, I'm still riding Patty. I don't know that you could shy away from putting a Pat Mahomes on there, and you just kind of have to hope that these next couple of weeks turn out to be pretty good ones. But obviously, he's playing New England. The next 2 weeks after that, I think you'll see a bit of a lighter bit of a load here because he played against Las Vegas, which it's always his friend Max Crosby on the other side of the ball. I think that becomes a different kind of Mahomes game. We've seen him channel that different level. Then they play Cincinnati, who's led up the most points to all quarterbacks in the championship week. So there's a nice little 3-game cushion here for Patrick Mahomes. And obviously, last week, the end of the game, the way that it ended, the press conferences, all of that, there's a lot of noise going on right now in Kansas City about Patrick, stomping around the field. And I think he's going to silence a lot of haters these next couple of weeks here as they try to fight for that number 1, if not number 2 seed.
Yeah, Brett, I completely agree with you. And Rashee Rice has been very consistent. So that's the biggest thing. You're going to keep trusting him and starting him. The biggest thing I think, other than the guys you said, is Isaiah Pacheco right now because out of practice on Wednesday today. So something to monitor. If he's out, I don't know if I'm confident to really start Clyde Edwards-Helaire because Jerick McKinnon gets involved, and there's a couple more running backs that they have there that they or wide receivers even that they bring into the running game too. So they kind of go crazy with that kind of stuff. So I feel like if Pacheco doesn't go, there's really nobody I really trust to put in my playoff matchup in that Kansas City backfield.
Yeah, I agree. I think that plain and simple, you're just looking for the reliability. So yeah, if Pacheco is in there though, you're putting Pacheco in because I think that he's proven himself to be very reliable, high floor and high ceiling, obviously. Yeah, if he's not in there, I'm staying away from that whole backfield. I think you probably have better options on your team.
Definitely.
All right, so let's head into the 4:00 window here. San Francisco, they head to Arizona. Zach, let's quickly go with San Francisco here, and I'm just going to say start your guys because I think that across the board here, it was a good performance against the team that we were a little, worried about them playing, but I think San Francisco has just become this sort of matchup-proof fantasy option, and obviously those are the guys that probably got you into your playoffs. You're going to ride them out through the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's crazy, Brett, that McCaffrey still finished running back 17 last week because he didn't end up getting a rushing touchdown. He got all those yards and he got one reception. He only finished running back 17, but it's no problem. He's going to have a really big week in this one. They're playing Arizona. So I feel like they're going to keep feeding him the ball. And of course, all those guys out wide with Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, what a last couple of weeks he's had has been huge for him in terms of fantasy value. Really turned himself into a very trustworthy starter. And of course, Kittle's going off right now. And a lot of people there's people who with tough options of starting Brock Purdy. If you don't have one of those top guys in front of them that you're making a decision on, start Brock Purdy because why not? He's slinging the ball around. He's going to have some fun down in Arizona. So I would definitely trust him if you don't have one of those top guys ahead of him, Brett.
I agree. And then as far as it goes on Arizona front, came off a week. So, you got to obviously temper your expectations as far as, what might have worked on off of the bye and that this game might be a blowout for them. That said, James Conner, he's pretty much, I think, Mr. Reliable for that one. I understand that there's a bit of a risk here with the matchup. I'm still okay with putting him in there. I think that if they are a spot where they're going to run the ball and they're going to try to force the run early in the game, Connor's going to get a lot of work. I think that the knock on teams playing against San Francisco is to try to pass the ball. I think that Arizona is going to try to run the ball a lot. They've been really good at it. They've been really good at sort of marching themselves up the field very, very slowly. A lot of short yardage plays. Trey McBride obviously going to factor in as well. And so I'm playing McBride. I'm playing Connor. Kyler Murray is an interesting one as well. He's a bit of a risk for a one quarterback league. Definitely a super flex option though for me. So I'd probably put him in the low end of quarterback ones.
Interesting, Brett. I'm actually this week in redraft. I'm staying away from Kyler Murray. I think this is the toughest matchups. The toughest matchup you can get is San Francisco, I think, and I would probably stay away from Kyler Murray in terms of redraft. I think there's just better options, and of course, if you have Kyler Murray, it's not because you drafted him early. You probably picked him up. So you have other options. Go with those guys who you could probably rely on a little bit more. So I would stay away from him definitely this week. It's just too tough of a matchup for me to really trust him in a playoff week. And then other than that, yeah, James Conner, you brought him up. It's a tough matchup, so I'd put him as a flex play. But I understand what you're saying there of he's going to get his touches. He will get his touches no matter what, whether it's maybe as a receiving back or just getting some touches in the run game. He will get those touches. So the volume will definitely be there. And Trey McBride's the only other one that's really on my radar. I agree with you. I'm actually starting him in a league where deciding between wide receivers, nope, I'll just start Trey McBride. I think he's a really solid option at tight end just because of the volume he gets and he has been getting with Kyler Murray under center.
Yeah, and just last thing on Connor, there's a lot of noise about Michael Carter, some of the running that they have there. I'm not sure I buy any of it. I think that there's really not a lot of competition for touches. And so, yeah, Connor's going to end up being a guy here moving forward, especially in these last 3 weeks where they're going to try to feed him the ball. Obviously, contract coming on, so kind of got to figure out what the offense looks like going forward. And the potential of a Marvin Harrison Jr. Might look kind of nice in that offense, just saying.
Yeah, it definitely will, Brett.
All right, so let's jump to our next matchup here. Washington at the Los Angeles Rams. Zach, let's start out with the Washington Commanders. They also come off a bye. And so we kind of have to rewind the tape a little bit to the week prior than that. They were playing against Miami. They got absolutely smacked, plus 35-15. Was just not a good performance all across the board. This is a game where since Howell is, I would say, a super flex option. Don't know that I'm putting him out of there. I understand that if you're in a bind, Sam Howell is not the worst option. If you're one of those teams that lost Justin Herbert, you're in a deeper league, you have Howell there sitting as your pickup. I'm okay with that. I think that Howell will have a good performance, but he's certainly not in a quarterback one range for me this week. But I would say start him in Superflex, definitely. And then obviously if you're in a bind, don't shy away from it. I think that he's proven that he's pretty good. The interesting situation for me is at running back. And it has to do with the fact that Brian Robinson he injured his hamstring. And so didn't play the rest of the game. So that said, monitor his health, obviously. If he's in there, he's a flex play for me because I don't know that he's going to be at 100%. I'm not buying the hype of Antonio Gibson this time around. I'm just not. And so for that said, I'm staying away from that. And then as far as Terry McLaurin goes, listen, the floor is really low for Terry. And so that kind of scares me this week. He's a flex option, but at the same time, you probably have figured out a way to get yourself some better options there at wide. And so I'm a little scared, though, by the potential of having a Terry McLaurin in my lineup just because the floor is just so low.
I agree on all fronts, Brett, and McLaurin, just touching on him. Yeah, he's a flex option for me, Brett. A little bit more low end flex option, just because it just has not been great. It has not been great numbers. Yeah, he's got a fair amount of targets, but the receptions they're sitting at 4 and 5 each and every game for the last couple of weeks or so. So nothing spectacular, and the upside is just very, very low right now for a guy like Terry McLaurin. And there's a couple of guys behind him that are kind of taking some of that, those receptions and big boom plays with Dotson as well as Curtis Samuel. I would not put them on the radar for this week just because it's fantasy playoffs time.
Yeah, as far as it goes with the Los Angeles Rams, I mean, those receivers, you're obviously going to start Puka Nacua. You're obviously going to start Cooper Kupp. Matthew Stafford is a name that's been around a lot here in the fantasy community because the last 3 weeks he plays Washington, New Orleans, and at the Giants. Very high floor for all 3 weeks, I would say. A little bit lower on the ceiling for week 16 against New Orleans, but I think that the way that the offense has been rolling, I think that it's a very good option here moving forward. Listen, I think that he's out there in a ton of leagues. He was one of the top added guys this past week. I think it was 20-something% of ads. And so, yeah, he's still out there in 50% of leagues, though. And so I think that that's a guy you should definitely go out and grab if you're in a bind. If you like Justin Herbert, you need a quarterback here going forward these last 3 weeks. That's a guy you're going out and getting. And then Kyren Williams. you're putting Kyron Williams in your lineup. I don't know that there's any other question.
Yeah, I agree on all fronts, Brett.
And then just last thing, Tyler Higbee, I don't think he merits anything. There was the couple weeks ago, he obviously got banged up pass game. But that performance a couple weeks ago against Arizona proved to not be much of anything. So I'm staying away from him as well.
Agreed.
All right, so we head to our 425 matchup. This should be a good one. Buffalo host the Dallas Cowboys. Zach, let's start out with Buffalo because I feel like we talked about the Cowboys a little bit at the top. As far as it goes with James Cook, I think that we've seen quite the turn of the corner in these last 4 or 5 matchups here. He's just been very consistent. Listen, the inside the 5-yard line roll still isn't coming to him. I don't know that that'll happen this entire season. It still seems like Josh Allen wants to run the ball when they get into the 5-yard line. And that's okay. I still believe that with the work in the passing game and the rushing game, I would say that James Cook probably factors in as a higher end running back 2 for these last 3 weeks here in the season.
That's definitely fair, Brett. I'll probably just put him in that running back 2 range. I think that's where he is just based on these matchups coming up. It's a little bit of a difficult one against Dallas this upcoming week, but I'm still confident that he'll be pretty solid for this Buffalo team, especially in the passing game. You mentioned the targets that he's been getting as well, and then he had 4 and then 7 the 2 weeks before the bye, and then 5 more this past week, and turned it into a lot of receptions. And of course, the touchdown, he's had a touchdown in 2 of those last 3 games. So big stuff out of the backfield and in the receiving game. And this Buffalo team's going to want to pass the ball. So that's huge right now as they get into those matchups where they may be slinging the ball a little bit more with Josh Allen. So I would definitely trust James Cook as an RB2 right now, Brett. As for everybody else, it's like start your guys, of course, with Diggs and as well as Dalton Kincaid. He's definitely still on the tight end radar, a little bit lower because it is a bit of a tougher matchup, I think, for tight ends going up against Dallas. I think Stephon Diggs is going to have a little bit of a tough matchup himself going up against Stephon Gilmore. But those 2 guys, Kincaid and Diggs, like they're going to get their volume. They're going to get those targets. So you're still going to be trusting them as you head into this playoff week. And of course, Josh Allen, he's a top 3 quarterback right now.
Yeah, and just looking at the Bills, I mean, as far as Diggs and the situation with him goes, it hasn't been it has not been an easy go for him for the last couple weeks here. 3 out of the last 4 games finishing in the single digits. And so, yeah, you temper your expectations a little. I understand that you're still playing them in your lineup. Like it is what it is. But, it is still a risk. And I think that that's a lingering thing. As far as Dalton Kincaid goes, yeah, I agree. It's a guy that is still out there in a handful of leagues. And if you grabbed him, it's probably because you didn't have a better option at tight end. And so, yeah, you're riding that wave through the end. I think that Kincaid is a high upside tight end 1, but right now ranks as a low end tight end 1.
Yeah, definitely, Brett. And as for, I'll take it. Yeah,
go ahead.
I'll take it to Dallas's. They've just been on fire lately, Brett. Really, really on fire. And it feels like every single guy is just putting up numbers. So that's huge. Dak is like unbelievable right now. You're going to keep trusting Dak because he's been absolutely terrific. So he's in the top 5 right now, definitely, in terms of quarterbacks in fantasy. Like keep starting him. It is a bit of a tougher matchup because he's going to Buffalo. It's not going to be. It might be snowing in Buffalo this weekend. We'll wait to see on that one. But I think the biggest thing is with CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, Tony Pollard, start them because they're putting up numbers right now. And as long as Dak is red hot, and he has been for the last couple of weeks. As long as he stays like that, you're going to keep trusting every single guy you got in this Cowboys offense.
Yeah, I agree on all fronts. The only guy I'm going to add to that potential, and it really just comes in on a dynasty perspective here, is Rico Dowdle. I think that the explosiveness of Rico Dowdle has definitely raised some eyebrows there in Dallas. He had 12 carries, 46 yards, scored a touchdown, finished in double-digit fantasy points. Listen, he's out there he's out there in like over 90% of leagues right now. Maybe take a flyer on him if you're in one of those dynasty leagues. He is a guy that is out there. Tony Pollard is a contract situation right now. And we'll see if he ends up coming back to Dallas next year. But if not, like, they have Rigo there. And so, I think that's an interesting situation, an interesting pickup. He did get scooped up in our league. I tried to get him this spring. Didn't get to get him. And so, I think that that's the only addition I would make on that front.
Agreed, bro.
All right, so we jump to Sunday Night Football, Baltimore at Jacksonville. Zach, we sort of talked about Jackson from our viewer question, but just breaking down the rest of the team. Evan Ingram, I think, we spoke. He's in your lineup. Like, you're riding off the hot game. He's in there, plain and simple. Etienne, he's in there, pretty easy. And then I would say Trevor Lawrence probably is a lower end quarterback 1, if not very high end quarterback 2. You're certainly starting him in Superflex, but are you looking to actually start him here in a one quarterback league?
Trevor Lawrence, probably not because of the matchup. I think this Baltimore D is just feasting on quarterbacks week after week, and I probably just stay away. Hopefully you got a better option next to him. I feel like a lot of people that took Trevor Lawrence, like, they kind of took a backup a little bit closer to him. So I feel like you may have some protection there for Trevor Lawrence, but this matchup is super, super difficult. I don't know if I can put him in my lineup in a playoff week to really trust him against this Baltimore defense.
Yeah, I agree completely. And then, just as far as the rest of the guys, like we are saying time, I think the floor is very low. And so as far as it comes to playoffs, like, not going to put any of them in.
Agreed, Brett. And ETN, of course, as well as Calvin Ridley and Evan Ingram. Those 3 guys really stand out.
Yeah, definitely. And as far as the Baltimore scenario goes, listen, they had a good game last week. It was a shootout against the Rams. And so a ton of guys with a ton of points. I think that Lamar, obviously, is starting Lamar Jackson. But after that, I would say it's probably like Zay Flowers. Is probably a low-end wide receiver 2 at the highest top, whereas he probably flex play at his lowest point. And so he's right there in that range. Wide receiver 3, if you're playing one of those leagues, like he's in there in your lineup. Then there's the interesting one of Odell Beckham Jr. and the decision on him. Listen, he had 4 catches last week, had 10 targets, though, which I think was the more eyebrow-raising number. 97 yards and a touchdown. And so I think there is some flex appeal for him, as well as Isaiah Likely, who had 5 catches for 83 yards and a touchdown. Both of them have solid appeal to be in the lineup for this week. And I would say probably in the Isaiah Likely case, you might have a better tight end, and that's understandable. If you don't have a tight end, you have Dalton Schultz, who's banged up. Like, Likely's a pretty good option there as a streamer. And then, I would say Odell's probably a flex option.
I agree with you. I think Likely is actually like a low-end tight end 1, Brett. I do, because of the matchup this week and because he's going to get targets. Like, I picked him up. I lost Mark Andrews and ended up picking up Isaiah Likely. He's slotted in perfectly. So, although like the projections are not always high for him, he's not the big name at tight end. Definitely still a guy who's going to get targets. So I'd put him in that low end tight end 1 range and I have seen a ton of people starting him in their leagues, especially now. You can trust him during playoff time.
Yeah, I agree on that one. Let's jump to our Monday night matchup here. It is the Philadelphia Eagles traveling to CenturyLink Field, and Zach, it's going to be a loud night there in Seattle as they take on the Seahawks. This is going to be one of those games where Pete Carroll has to muster his defense to take on one of the top offenses in the league. As far as Philly goes, listen, I think we've said it all season. Start your guys. They got you here. I think that you kind of can't shy away from really any of them. I mean, you down the list. You got AJ Brown, obviously. Hurts, obviously. Goddard, I think it kind of depends on your situation. I'm in a spot right now where if I was playing Goddard versus Trey McBride, who's my other tight end, probably starting McBride because I think the upside's higher there. Goddard did sort of work his way back from injury, but I think he's still working. 4 catches, 30 yards, didn't score. And so there's that. I would say that you are starting Devonta Smith, though, based on the upside. And I think the floor is proven in this last bulk of weeks here, excluding like the first 5 weeks of the season or so, whatever that stretch was where he wasn't doing well. I think the floor is very high for Devonta Smith, and he's going to factor in pretty well.
I agree with you. And of course, I'm going to say DeAndre Swift. I think he's going to be a option for Philly this week because although there have been a couple of question marks, like Seattle's a really, really good matchup. We just saw McCaffrey run absolutely all over them. So I think it's going to be a good matchup against Seattle for Philly. So I would be riding with DeAndre Swift over Kenneth Gainwell in this matchup. And you bring up a good point in Goddard because he's kind of easing back into things. It's more of a high-end tight end 2 rather than putting him in that tight end 1 conversation just because it's a little bit of a question mark right now, Brett.
Yeah, and I think that we'll talk about him obviously more next week when they go and they take on the Giants. I think that's a more palatable matchup than it is this week. On a Monday Night Football game on the road in Seattle. I do think that it's pretty notable that we didn't see a Zach Ertz signing, though. They didn't go out. They didn't grab Zach Ertz. That, to me, says that Goddard is their guy, and they're really not going to shy away from that. So, yeah, I just think that as far as this week goes, there might be a better option on the tables. And it's understood if there is. Just based on the fact that I think that they're going to slowly work him back here.
Yep, agreed, Brett.
And then as far as it goes on the other side of the coin, with Seattle, I mean, you have Geno Smith, and we'll see about the health and whether it ends up playing this week. Yes, Drew Lock is out there, and last week he was pretty good. 22 of 31 for 269 yards, 2 touchdowns. So obviously in those deeper super flex leagues, like a lot of eyebrows raised on this game here and who's going to be the quarterback there. If it's Drew Lock, I'm not playing him. Philly's defense has been wishy-washy all year, but there's been weeks where they've been really on. I think this is going to be one of those weeks, plain and simple. So for me, I'm staying away from them. As far as it goes with the running back situation, though, it looks like that both Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet are going to play this game. I think that means you kind of have to go back to the Kenneth Walker is the guy. And though Charbonnet obviously work while Kenneth Walker was hurt, Kenneth Walker for me goes right back in the lineup. Charbonnet goes right back to the bench. And then as far as it goes after that, you're playing DK, and then you're probably playing Lockett, and then that's it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Lockett's more of a flex guy, like low-end flex guy. It is a solid matchup for them because it's the Philly defense that teams have kind of picked apart their secondary, especially over the last couple of weeks. So something to keep on the radar. There could be better options, though, on your roster versus Lockett. I would say the one thing about Kenneth Walker is it is a tough matchup. So you're going to limit expectations here. And although there's some running backs where you say, all right, well, it's a tough matchup. They'll get points no matter what. I'm not positive just yet on Kenneth Walker, Brett, because I feel like they're going to have to throw the ball a ton in this one. And they kind of eased him back in last week, I would say. But it's still kind of difficult because he had 8 carries for 21 yards. That wasn't great. He had some receptions, and that also wasn't great. Like the receptions were better because he had 4 receptions, 5 targets, 33 yards, and one of them was for 27 yards. So, I mean, without that big play, it's a really rough week. I'd be limiting expectations on Walker again. I'd put him in a RB3 category. I don't know if I'd put him in an RB2 category.
Yeah, it's fair. Listen, I think that Philly has done a good job of containing some of their opponents here. That's going to be their focal point of who they have to contain, and so I do agree with you. I'm not going to bench him by any means, but he still warrants a tempered expectation.
Definitely.
All right, so let's head into our lock of the week, our ones to watch. First, starting off with the lock of the week, these are guys who are flex considerations. So outside of the top 30 of consensus rankings. Zach, last week, you took a sweep on both of these. So congratulations. Good work. You still got some work to do on the ones to watch, but it seems like you're in the clear here on lock of the week as we head into these last couple weeks here of the season, up 9-5. You took Romeo Doubs, who ended up finishing with 7.2 PPR points, to my Jordan Addison, who finished with 4.7 PPR points. So you get first pick here on lock week.
Let's do it, Brett. And it's an interesting one here because and it's kind of based on the matchup for me this week. I'm going with Brandon Cooks of the Dallas Cowboys, and they're playing in Buffalo this weekend. And some might say, oh, well, that's a little bit of a tougher matchup. I don't think so, actually, because I think in this secondary, Buffalo has had a lot of injuries, and they're still trying to figure things out. One thing I'll say about this game is I actually think Dallas is going to win comfortably in this game based on how this offense is rolling. And I don't know if it's going to come from CeeDee Lamb, because I think that's where a lot of Buffalo's focus is going to be. I think they're going to end up zoning in on CeeDee Lamb in this one. And I think it'll lead to some openings for Brandon Cooks. He's the second guy, and he's had some really solid weeks recently in fantasy. So I'm riding with Brandon Cooks. He's a flex play for me this week in a solid matchup against Buffalo.
All right. So with me down, and needing some big plays here, I'm going out on a limb here on a guy who I think is a risky flex play, but I'm taking the upside on it. It's Josh Palmer. It is a guy who I think, obviously, we heard the situation with Keenan Allen, and he's not going to play. It's a guy that I think could end up finishing as their number one receiver when it's all said and done this week. Spoke up at the top of the show about Easton Stick and how during training camp he was with Josh Palmer pretty much regularly. And so this is, yes, it's a risky pick with obviously Justin Herbert not playing. Josh Palmer scored double-digit fantasy points for 5 straight weeks before he got knocked out in week 8. And so, yeah, it's a guy that I'm going to take here as my lock of the week.
Interesting, Brett. I mean, I like it because there's not many options right now in LA, and Easton Stick's going to have to throw the ball to somebody. So that definitely works there.
Yeah, that was sort of the thought process, is somebody's going to have to get the ball. So, why not get it to the guy who was getting a lot of targets before he obviously went down and got hurt. Let's jump over to our ones to watch. These are guys who are going to end up being waiver targets next week. Zach, these are guys who are owned in less than 50% of leagues. And so I'm kind of creaming in this category here. We're up 11-3 in the standings, but you came back and you got one on picking Zay Jones, who goes off for 7.9 PPR points on 14 targets, to Jonathan Mingo, who I picked, who had 4.2 PPR points on 9 targets. Zach, who are you taking here?
I was gonna say, Bray had a little bit of a rough one the last week because he had a great pick. He got a ton of targets, but it only turned into 2 receptions for you. And I mean, I got a little lucky on this one with Zay Jones because he had those 14 targets, didn't turn into a lot. So I do think those 2 guys definitely on the radar still, and more than ever, I think Zay Jones is on that radar based on the target share. But for this week, I'm going with a guy that you talked a little bit about earlier. It is Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. And the only reason I'm doing it is because the last couple of weeks, I've seen a little bit of an increase in his touches as well as his work in the passing game. I think that's the biggest thing. And running backs who get work in the passing game, like in PPR leagues, that's golden. Like that's really, really important. I would put him on the radar right now. Of course, we're in playoff season, so you're never going to end up like starting a guy like Chase Brown, but put him on the radar, stash him just in case something happens in these last couple of weeks. All of a sudden that he breaks out, whether it's an injury or not. Like Chase Brown getting those targets out of the backfield, I think is huge in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when you take a look at some of the opportunities that have been there in Cincinnati for Joe Mixon, and he's just been on a tear. Like, yeah, God forbid something happens to Joe Mixon, like he's going to be right in there, Chase Brown, those last 2 weeks. That comes a potential league winner, a top 15 running back. Like, you know, the opportunity for him will be there if anything does happen. He becomes a starter. So yeah, it is a good pick. I'm going out on a limb, and the first time in the history of the show, it took 31 episodes. I'm taking the same guy that I took for Flex Lock of the Week in Ones to Watch. I'm taking Josh Palmer. He is owned in only 28% of leagues. And so, Zach, he's out there in 72% of leagues. I don't understand. He could be the number 1 receiver heading into this game. I get the quarterback situation, but they're in a spot right now where I just said at the top of the show, they are tied right now with the potential opportunity they could jump to like the 5th pick in the draft. You're telling me that if they're in the 5th pick in the draft, their management team is going to say, hey, we need to throw Keenan Allen out there and give him the potential opportunity to get hurt? I don't think so. I think they're smarter than that. If Keenan Allen can't go this week and he's still kind of banged up, I wouldn't be shocked if they shut him down for those last couple of weeks. Josh Palmer could be the number 1 receiver here going forward. And, you know, for him to be out there in 70% of leagues is crazy to me. That's a guy that I'm definitely picking up.
Definitely fair, Brett. And even with Easton Stick, I like the confidence here with Josh Palmer.
Listen, I just think that as far as it goes in Dynasty, like I picked him up in our Dynasty League. We talk about contract situations and Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and what their opt-outs are after this year. And obviously Mike Williams coming off a torn ACL, contract injury settlements. They're all things in the NFL that you sort of have to pay attention to. So Josh Palmer was a guy that I definitely had on the radar for Dynasty. But yeah, listen, it's a rough go. I think that when they shut down Justin Herbert, it sort of changed the outlook on what this season was going to be. This wasn't going to be a fight to the finish by any means. I think that they're sort of looking at the long approach, and that might mean shutting down their top receiver as well. Maybe saying goodbye to their number 1 running back at the end of the year as well. Could mean some carries there for some of the guys, as Staley hinted at just last week.
Definitely fair, Brett.
All right, so that'll do it. And Zach, we head into our fantasy playoff here, and obviously my teams are on a bye, so I'm sort of kicking back for a couple of teams. Well, I shouldn't say all my teams. I do have one team that is in play this week, and so, you know, any last thoughts here before our viewers head into the thick of it here in the playoffs?
I'm just hoping that Jared Goff comes through because, of course, Herbert out now for the year. I need Jared Goff to step up for the big team. I do have a stack with Sam Laporta in that league, so I'm excited for that.
Yeah, just really, I'm looking for the Detroit Lions to get back to what they were doing here previously, and you know that offense looked not like the Detroit Lions of old. 16 different ways for them to get into the playoffs this weekend. And so, listen, I'm looking at David Montgomery. They're playing against the top-ranked or the bottom-ranked defense in terms of running back. And so this might be a get-right game for him. I think as far as it goes, though, yeah, there's a lot of guys. It should be kind of interesting to see how my guys do on the bye week, and it might make my decisions a little bit easier here moving forward.
Definitely.
All right, so that'll do it for this week. Please subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. And in the words of Aaron Rodgers, the night is darkest before the dawn, and we shall rise yet again. For Zach Malaman, I'm Brett Alvin, signing off the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll catch you next week in Week 16.